right, so with us in uniform, Geir Hågen Karlsen, you've all seen him on TV, I think. Lieutenant Colonel and Director of Strategic Communications for the Norwegian Defence University College. Armed Forces leading expert on strategic influence operations, strategic communication, information operations, and psychological operations as well. Didn't know that. Senior Staff Officer at Armed Forces Crisis Staff. And he walks, talks, and sleeps crisis, so we will hear a lot about it. And Janne, we can wait with you. Yes, you're getting then. Yeah, you're coming. Yngve Kvistad, commentator at Verdens Gang, Norway's largest newspaper. Hurts my heart a little bit coming from Aftenposten in my time, but okay.
Same owner.
Yes. An author and a bit of a Churchill expert. And then Janne Håland Madlari, welcome. Your CV is as long as a book in itself, so I can't read it all. But Professor of International Politics at the University of Oslo and Norwegian Defence University College. Used to be, or has been, a State Secretary of Foreign Affairs, visiting professor at University of Notre Dame, research associate at Pembroke College, Oxford University, and you've written so many books that I can't talk about them all, but you've written a book about, or you've been an editor for a book for military strategy in the 21st century, The Challenge for NATO, and Britain's defense role after Brexit. Welcome all. Hi, Matthew. Thank you. So we're just going to dive into the, I don't know, the most depressing part of this evening, I think, Russian aggression. Something Churchill was very, very aware of, and you've already been told about the Iron Curtain speech. And he said, just one little quote, "I cannot forecast to you the actions of Russia. It is a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. But perhaps there is a key. That key is Russian national interests." So I think that's a really good start, Geir Hågen. I think maybe you could tell what's the situation on the ground. Everybody here would like to hear what's the situation on the ground now. Any good news?
Well, sorry, Håkon, no good news about Ukraine today. But first, madam, fascinating to learn firsthand about your grandfather. Very interesting, so thank you. When it comes to the situation on the ground there, it's pretty much a frozen conflict. The Russians are holding more than 100,000 square kilometers, and they have dug in hundreds of thousands of troops. And as far as we can see, whatever the foreseeable future is, there is no likelihood that any of the parties will prevail militarily. And I have three scenarios, and that's the first one, and the most likely one is we're confronted with a very long war of attrition. Another scenario is a peace agreement that requires that both parties will actually go into peace agreement, and none of them will do that right now, and President Putin will not do it. We think he will not do it as long as he's leading Russia, which means we can be having this challenge for a long time. Third scenario is a sort of breakdown on the Russian side. That was a pretty far-fetched idea until the 24th of June, when the Wagner group turned around 180 degrees and marched on Moscow to remove the Minister of Defense and the Chief of Defense, downing at least 6 Russian military helicopters and an airplane from the Russian Air Force. That shows that under the strong facade of the regime, there is certainly a lot of tension. Whether it's likely, don't know, but it's a possibility. So that's the news about the Eastern Front today. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I recommend all of you, wherever you work and whatever you're doing, be prepared to handle a very long war and some nasty surprises. Nasty surprise might be a nuclear accident, industrial accident where International Atomic Energy Agency has warned about this for almost 2 years. Or a missile hitting a schoolyard in Poland, killing 50 kids, or something like that. Might be a brutal morning. That's what we're facing. But you asked what Sir Winston would do. Yeah, I think this is his most famous quote. Never give in. Never, 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 never give in. And that's what the Ukrainians are doing right now. They will not give in. So we just have to help them keep that going till something changes the situation on the ground, or politically in Moscow.
Matlari, Putin is not Hitler, and the war in Ukraine is not the Second World War, but certainly the quotes from Winston Churchill is it's a relevant quote today.
Yes, I think he certainly recognized that the world is a place with a lot of, wouldn't say evil, but a lot of hard-nosed interests, and that the Russians are not liberal democrats. Not then, the Soviets, not now. My youngest daughter, Sophie, she used to say when she was little, "Give me an ice cream now and I shall not start to scream." So this is the Russian way of negotiation. This is a maximalist, showing power, showing willingness to be tough, and if you're weak, you are losing. It's a zero-sum logic. And we are in the West, in liberal democracy, we think the world is a win-win proposition, and that it's really stupid to have a zero-sum logic. But I think we're dealing with Russia. Before I came here, I watched the news that Finland has closed all but one border crossing from Russia to Finland because of this weaponization of migration. And this is, this is so primitive, yet it is happening, it has happened before and will happen again. So we have to be able to counter all these grey zone attacks. Russia is at war with us. We are not at war with Russia militarily, but in the grey zone we are. And this is, I think, a very unwelcome reality which we try to avoid accepting. And I think Sir Winston would have been very adamant and clear that this is reality. We have to face reality, and we have to have courage and statesmanship in devising strategy. And when I look around in Europe, I don't see any leaders that have this propensity, this courage, this risk willingness, because strategic interaction, if you're going to prevail, you have to be able to take risk. You have to have personal courage. And I don't see politicians that want to rise to the occasion. They rather try to be reactive and avoid trouble. So now here we are with Russia, as you say, in a clearly adversarial relationship for many, many years to come. We may have escalation up to this extremely dangerous situation of tactical nuclear weapons. We may have grey zone attacks for years. We will have sanctions for years, most certainly. For you in business, you are collateral damage in this war. And we will have this unpleasantness of having to deal with Russia and be courageous enough to have a strategy to counter Russia, because they will only understand this sort of strong will, courage, willingness to face confrontation. And one could, perhaps Sir Winston would have pointed out that the gross domestic product of France, Britain and Germany put together is far bigger than the GDP of Russia, which is similar to Spain's. So Russia is in a way a gas station with nukes, as General Petraeus said. That's a bit nasty, but they can take it.
Well, you've said several times Norwegian politicians have not taken into, they haven't really woken up to a new reality in Europe. You said that many times. In here, you are mostly business leaders. What about business leaders? Do we actually understand what's going on, and what can we do other than prepare our value chains?
Yes, I think you are forced into this reality. You are the ones that suffer mostly from sanctions. You risk American extraterritorial sanctions if you deal with anybody that the US sanctions, and they are many. And you have to be extremely careful. You should trade, when you trade with China, which one certainly should, there should be a strategic analysis of the relationship, who is the most dependent on whom. We did that for a long time with Russian gas from the mid 80s. I started working on this in my first job in the oil and energy ministry, and then it was all about Ronald Reagan, Russian gas, who's dependent on whom. One never resolved the issue, but one thought this is win-win. He gets, the Russians get the money, we get the gas, it's a win-win. And so it was, until it wasn't anymore. So now Russia has cut off that extremely lucrative deal, the gas. It shows that they are willing to, and the Chinese may also be willing to, do such things. So what the Americans call now de-risking and decoupling, all these these terms that are not very elegant, that's you have to do the power analysis of, can you take a confrontation if it comes to one? You should trade, but you should not be the dependent party. So all of this is new. This is what you have to do as business, in your own business, and then you have to observe all the sanctions, all the political changes, discussions, whether the Americans and the Europeans are splitting up on China. Are they disagreeing on China, which is a big possibility that they may. So here, there's a lot for you to do, and I think politicians so far have had the easiest time because they have, in a way, they've been reactive, and it is again the US that has led regarding the war in Ukraine.
Geir Hågen Karlsen, you said we must not show weakness. I'm going to throw quotes at you all night. So listen, this is what Winston Churchill said. From what I have seen of our Russian friends during the war, I'm convinced that there is nothing they admire so much as strength. And there is nothing for which they have less respect than for weakness, especially military weakness.
Absolutely
Pretty
agree.
right, wasn't he?
I've been working with the Russians for quite a lot, and I was liaison to Russian troops in the Balkans for many months, and I've been there many times. Agree 100%. They will always test you as militaries. Politically, that's what they're doing with the Finns right now. They're testing the Finns politically, and you just punch them on the nose, whatever that means in where you're standing. Poke your finger in their eye, whatever it takes. They will respect it, and then you can have business as usual afterwards. But if you show weakness, they will play their games, and you will just be pushed along. That goes for countries, it goes for military exchanges, it goes for business, everything. I'm sure those of you that have worked with Russian business knows this very well. It's the first thing they will do is to test you, see if you're strong enough.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go along. Next year there are 3 huge elections in the world: UK, US, and the EU. So if you think democracy is a weak institution, then maybe next year will be the year to create turmoil around the world. Am I right in this, or?
Well, it kind of looks like that. We also had this election now in Holland, in the Netherlands, yesterday, which also showed that the ultra-right is on its move. I just want to go back to the quote you mentioned, the first quote you had there, because that's quite typical for Churchill, and is one of his phenomenal qualities, and that's his foresight. He predicted Hitler and the Nazis and the war long before, because he was a historian. He knew the Prussians. He had seen it all coming. Same thing about Stalin and the Iron Curtain. He foresaw that as well. Because he was a historian. He had read lots and lots whenever he was in the army, and at Sandhurst when his comrades there wanted to go out and have a drink or play or something. He would go to his room and read, studied all the time. So he knew his military history, he knew his history, he knew his political history, and all this made him such a great analyst. I was losing my point there. Yeah, the election.
He foresaw everything.
Yeah.
All the big pictures.
Yeah.
Yep. But you told me earlier that he was also a great politician because he admitted
His
faults.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Well, you have this. There are several things. Ms. Solmser said that he had his misjudgments. He got the abdication wrong. He got the gold standard wrong. He got the suffragettes thing wrong. It was very old-fashioned. It was against the whole idea that women should have any voting rights. And of course, there was this Dardanelles situation, which he also got very wrong. But the one thing you learned from that was that because this was, I'm not sure that Geir Hågen could tell more about it, but this was a military situation in First World War in 1915 outside Constantinople, and the English Marine, they lost, I think it was about 5-6 naval ships. And this was due to a miscalculation by Winston Churchill, who was then the Lord of the Admiralty. But what he learned from that was that when the Second World War came, he would never, if he got an advice from the commanding chiefs of the military branches, if they were agreed upon something, he would never go against them. Even he had his constitutional right to do so. Some would say he also would have the military backup to say so. He was, of course, the prime minister. He was also the minister of defense. But if they had said something, he would never overturn them. He would not turn against them. And that was obviously because he had learned from his fault.
You respected knowledge.
Yeah, respected knowledge.
All right. So not like today then, when any influencer is pretty much worth the same as anybody who's studied something for 20 years.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was my personal opinion. But you work as a commentator in Norway's largest newspaper and work close to power, close to our politicians. What do you think? Do they admit mistakes, faults, learn from them?
Does it look that way? No, and that's another thing about Churchill. I would say that he's such he showed leadership so profoundly. He was a torch in himself. He was a role model for not for all the politicians, but for I was going to say anyone. He had a moral and physical courage that no one else had. I mean, like when he was in the First World War, he was commanding. He was a lieutenant in the Scottish Army. He would never ever command any of his soldiers to do anything that he wouldn't dare to do. So it often happened that he did the things that some of the soldiers should have done. So he went out. He went out from. Went into the fields. He spied on the Germans. Sometimes they say that he was so close that he could hear the Germans discussing. So he was such he had this moral, as I said, and physical courage, and combined with the foresight and later on the eloquence, which I guess we'll talk about later. But it kind of made him the perfect leader and the perfect prime minister, and especially in that. Difficult times.
Mantlari, the first thing you said when you walked in here, you said we have to talk about him as a statesman and his political leadership. Does this?
Yes, I mean he. unlike politicians today, he knew the military tool of the state, ultima ratio regum, the last argument of the king is military power, and that means that military power is the only type of power that will do when there is a challenge of sovereignty of a state's existence and so on. This is completely foreign to the modern politician. We have states that whose existence is challenged today. Russia wants to wipe Ukraine off the map. Hamas, the same with Israel. Two existential situations. This is completely unknown today. And then politicians today are not very well educated. We had some data on comparing cabinets across the globe, and the Nordic cabinets, the cabinet ministers have the least education in the whole world. The Africans are much better educated. In Germany, they have to have a doctorate even if they have to forge one. As we know, that's a bit difficult, a bit over the top. But there is so little knowledge of history, there's so little formation of those who become government ministers. And I think in general, history matters nothing today to the Brits, maybe to the educated French and so on. But in general, there is so little knowledge of history, maybe because everything is very relativistic, subjectivistic, emotional.
And
I feel that this war should end.
Yeah.
Sort of emotions instead of rational argument.
Because you've been called a rationalist, haven't you, by your opponents?
Well, I hope that's a wonderful compliment to be a rationalist and realist. Yes.
Hard-nosed realist.
Hard-nosed realist.
I'm working with her.
Yeah. Well, this is, Sigrid Undset, our great author, Catholic convert. She said, I'm a realist in all things. One must be a realist in all things. And of course, learning from history, what you do in military academies is to read and learn, compare, discuss, learning from history. And there is changing character of war. I'm attached to this Oxford Changing Character War Centre. It's named the Changing Character of War, but there is also a permanent nature of war. So the permanent nature is the basis for strategic interaction, and that's where states have to be able or the statesmanship has to be a virtue developed in politicians. But this is so far away from the current political scene, both in the US and in Europe.
Just to follow up, I think someone observed at the time some while back that EU was the first empire where military knowledge had absolutely no relevance at all for the leadership. But that said, I think we shouldn't underestimate the political ability to actually learn from the situation and stand up to the challenges. Look at President Zelensky in Ukraine. He was an actor. He's probably of the same class as your grandfather.
Yeah.
There will be statues of him all around Ukraine, wherever that war ends, for sure. But also our own leaders. I think we shouldn't underestimate the change that we've experienced from the outset of the war in February last year, where everyone was pretty scared about what the Russians would do. And we're now in a situation, it has taken 1.5 years or even more, where there is a lot more will to provide the Ukrainians with advanced weapons. I don't think the politicians are the challenge there, it's actually the electorate. Because there is a risk that, if this winter becomes cold and dark and expensive, and then the populist parties might win somewhere around Europe and going against the support for Ukraine. I think that's the biggest challenge we have right now, not the leaders. Just look back at the COVID period. We had heads of state able to tell their population that we have to do a lot of difficult, challenging, and very expensive things to maintain health in the population. And we have to go back to China after, before we quit here, because that's going to be
I'm just going to follow the flow. If you want to talk about China, we'll dive into it. But Emma Songs, you are the real Churchill expert here. What does it sound like to you?
It has great echoes of what I know about my grandfather, and there are probably many people in this room who probably technically know more about him than I do. But it is also true that in the 1930s, the political class was pretty weak, as it is now, and it's almost a sort of precursor.
Yeah, exactly.
So everything you said has a sort of ring of hideous possibility about it. And it's been a long time since we've had a Putin. So everybody's got very cozy in front of the fire, and then this is all very inconvenient, and it doesn't fit with our worldview. But luckily there are a few people, such as President Zelensky, who are prepared to stand up and fight the good fight.
Krista, you made a career out of creating words. Have a guess at this. Who said this? We will fight till the end. At sea, in the air, we will continue fighting for our land, whatever the cost. We will fight in the forest, in the fields, on the shores, in the streets. We will not give up.
We shall never surrender.
Who said that?
Winston Churchill.
No. It was actually Zelensky.
Oh, it was Zelensky. Okay.
Zelensky said that when he went to House of Commons.
Exactly.
Who do you think inspired him?
Well, but
He forgot the beaches.
He forgot the beaches.
They haven't got many of those.
Exactly.
Very
exactly.
few, very short.
Yeah.
there's an interesting story about that in this fantastic book by Andrew Roberts. If you should read one volume biography of Winston Churchill, read this one. I'm sure many of you has read Roy Jenkins and some of the other voluminous biographies, but this one is fantastic. And this is actually the 1010th biography about Winston Churchill. And until 2018, there were only 1009 biographies. This was 1010.
So remember that every 1010.
Yeah. And
That's the one.
Yeah, and it's full of anecdotes, and it's you don't have to take my word for it, but it's actually the best one-volume biographies of Winston Churchill. Everybody in British press had said so, and one of the things that he, of course, analyzes and wants to dig into is the eloquence of Winston Churchill. Where did it come from? How could he compose these fantastic speeches? They all sounded, of course, that there was something that he made up as he stood there, but they were all worked out, and he had practiced on them, and all that. And at one time, his private secretary asked him, "How do you do it? I mean, what's the secret behind these speeches?" And he said, "Well, there are 4 things. And the first thing is you need each sentence need to convey one idea, and one idea only. That's the one thing. The second thing was keep the sentences short, but the words long. And then he said use the Anglo-Saxon vocabulary, the old English words which the peoples of England have known for 1,000 years. So when you wrote The Fight on the Beaches and the landing grounds, on the fields, on the streets, and all that, he used all those tricks in the book that he had made of himself. And if you look at the last paragraph, and the very most famous paragraph, it contains like 141 words. And all of them, but 2 are in the Old English vocabulary. And it's not the landing grounds. They come from the Dictionary of the Old English. The only two exceptions being the word confidence, which is from Latin, and the other one is surrender, which is French.
Okay, anybody, any French here? No. Okay, you wanted to talk about China. Let's talk about China. So actually, Churchill had an opinion on China as well, believe it or not. He said, ought we to recognize them, that this was the communist China, or not? He said, recognizing a person is not necessarily an act of approval. I will not be personal or give instance. One has to recognize lots of things and people in this world of sin and woe, and the one does not like. The reasons for having diplomatic relations is not to offer a compliment, but to secure a convenience. You've talked about China for, you know, every day, every night for weeks now, and you said we need to keep open dialogue with them and we need to trade with them.
Absolutely. And I'm going to go back to Sir Winston. He was a fervent advocate of free trade, but he also never hesitated to confront authoritarians, right? I think that's the two things we have to do when it comes to China. China is a partner. I'm sure for many of you it's a very important partner, whether you're importing or exporting to China. They're also definitely a security challenge. They're authoritarian states. They're stealing as much technology as they can from the West. That's one of the reasons why the US are limiting their access to the high-end technologies. And I think we have to find a balance between business, security, and other issues. Other issues might be human rights, it might be environment, transparency in supply chains, as Hugo mentioned earlier on today. And I think there are a number of cases in Norway now where everything with regards to China is dangerous, so stay away. I think that's totally flawed. I think we should reduce dependence on China on critical areas. Some minerals, some other issues. That will take a long time. It's not going to happen tomorrow or next year. And we have to reduce vulnerability. Example is, I know no companies in oil, gas, or power generation that will buy a control system for their infrastructure from China, right? But don't hesitate to buy a Chinese electrical car, for instance. That shouldn't be a problem. You have to reduce dependence to a...
So to buy a Volvo is okay?
Volvo is a Chinese car, at least Chinese owned.
And that's okay to buy?
Right, I don't care where you drive. I have an old diesel Toyota. So I'm happy. I don't care. That car is never going to tell me anything, tell me what I'm going to do.
Exactly.
So have fun with your electrical vehicle. No, but we have to reduce dependence to a sufficient level. Doesn't mean zero. To a level where we say we're not so vulnerable, and avoid vulnerabilities in key areas. If you do that, you can max out on business. I think we can do more business with China, a lot more business with China, as long as we are selectively reducing dependence and vulnerabilities in key areas. And that's a balance here. That will be fervently pro-business and trade, while we're also taking care of security.
Mandari.
Yes, you should think of the 5 C's. The first C is cooperation. You can all, we're all used to that, win-win. Then there's competition. We can cooperate and we can compete at the same time. That's normal business, that's normal liberal democracy. Then there is confrontation, conflict, coercion. Can you coerce your business partner if you need to, or can he coerce you, confront you, and you lose and he wins? Open conflict, difficult. So we have to, this repertoire of possible C's is the new menu, so to speak, and one has to master all the 5 C's, if possible. And that's certainly what, if you look at China, just yesterday an Australian warship was doing some diving, had some exercise doing some diving in the South China Sea, and a Chinese frigate didn't shoot at it, but used strong sonar, the sonar you use for detecting submarines, which could have killed the divers, which is an extremely aggressive behavior. And this is the kind of military testing and aggression that we see a lot of from the Russians and from the Chinese. So certainly the Chinese are extremely aggressive diplomatically and in terms of testing the waters, literally, in the South China Sea and vis-a-vis Taiwan. So we shouldn't be naive. We must be realistic and then look at also China's, in a way, interest in power balancing. Does it want to remain the ally forever, as it has promised, of a Russia that may be poorer and poorer, more and more unruly, more and more, in a way, enfant terrible of the international system, or does it perhaps want to do more with the West? I mean, China is the big powerful joker in this game, in a way, and we should in the West try to bring China to our side if possible. This is akin to the Cold War, where the Soviet Union, China, and the West had these possibilities of balancing each other. So I think we right now there's an axis of, I shouldn't say evil, I'm not an American politician who uses these terms, but it's rather tempting. North Korea, Iran, and Russia plus China. It's a sort of axis powers, at least, that we have to deal with. But it's not set in stone that China will be in this group in the future. So I think trading and political relations, all with full knowledge of what goes on, and that you may cooperate in one area and have a conflict in another.
And the Chinese are willing to use our dependence as political weapons.
Yeah, they will try to test us and see. I mean, if you're an expat in China, you're from Canada or Australia, you may be arrested on charges of espionage, as it is useful to have these hostages to negotiate with. So then its business becomes politicized, and that's a real risk for some nations.
For a long time, this special relationship with the UK and US has been stabilized in our part of the world anyway. In the last few years, we've had, 5 different prime ministers, and we might see a comeback of Trump next year. How worried should we be about for 2024? Madlari, would you, any ideas?
Well, I think it's fully possible that Trump is re-elected, especially now the Middle East conflict plays into domestic American politics with sort of the very left part of the Democratic Party being extremely pro-Palestinian and creating sort of support for the Republicans that are standing by Israel. So there are things happening that play into this. Although the polls indicate that Biden will win, we don't know that. But we have to plan with Trump as president, because we always have to plan with the worst scenario, for the worst scenario. So it means that Europe has to be much more able to take responsibility for its own fate, its own role, have a leading role. This is, in a way, we should have led ourselves and had much more of a regional leading role a long time ago. I mean, the Americans have been pointing to our lack of defense spending, lack of willingness to lead internationally, always leaning on the US while criticizing the US. So we need the US, this special relationship that Sir Winston invented, and pleaded for and really realized. It is so special, said Helmut Kohl, that only the British had heard of it. He was quipping. But this is a reality in intelligence, in military affairs, and this is what we are, in a way, benefiting so much from here in Norway. NATO was created, as you know, in 1949, 4th of April, signed the Washington Treaty, and that was partly because Norway was pleading with the British government, please try to get the Americans to sign on to this Atlantic Pact, because we are very unsure how the Soviets are planning. What are they planning? So we were so afraid of the Soviet Union at that time and really wanted this. And Britain is our closest ally, of course, in NATO and in general. So this is, we have a new book coming with Hurst in London in February on these alliances within the alliance. And that is now really clear after with the Ukraine war, how we now have Russia as the strategic threat to us, and therefore can integrate much more under British leadership, nor the countries in NATO looking to Britain, and Britain, of course, close to Washington. So Northern Europe becomes more important, and we become much more integrated. This is a sort of continuation from before World War II.
I know you all hate this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. How would Winston Churchill, how would he have reacted to Brexit?
He knows the answer.
Yeah, that guy over there.
Well, I've been covering British politics since 1992, the landslide of John Major. And since then, in every election, in every political discourse in the UK, now the Brexit, of course, there was always this question: what would Winston Churchill have said? What would William Shakespeare have said? None of them were around. I'm pretty sure that this is going to be a bit strange, because now I'm going to quote your mother. I went to a lecture, I heard Andrew Roberts' presentation, was a book presentation, and he quoted your mother in that question. And she said, never assume that you know what Papa would have said under any circumstances, especially what happened after his death. So that's it.
Yeah.
That's the answer.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant wrap-up. Any questions? This is the time. Yes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your participation in this panel, and especially to you, Ms. Aas, for coming to Norway. So, Churchill was famous for building strong personal relationships. We have seen that with Roosevelt, even with Stalin. Do you think personal relationship has outplayed its role in international politics? Or is it still of relevance?
I think it's absolutely relevant, because it's so much easier to do political business with other people if you know them just as business. Take an example, our own government's very close relation with Germany. A little bit off topic here, but Germany is emerging probably as one of the, we have a strong relation with UK traditionally, and militarily, from much more than with the Germans. But in today's situation, with Germany as the biggest economy in Europe, our biggest customer when it comes to gas, and the biggest power in Europe.
You know what chamber you're in now, right?
Yeah. Well, that was a
I just gonna
that was a
remind.
practical case, right? I said it was a little bit, on the side here, just as an example. I think that's tremendously important for Norway as long as we're outside EU, together with another country.
Yeah.
We need strong partners in the EU, and we need strong partners to handle America and their policies when it comes to Inflation Reduction Act and other policies. Where if we are not along
now
with,
you're arguing in terms of interest, aren't
yeah,
you?
but
Not
my
because
point-
Olaf
my
Scholz
point
is so.
my point is that the personal relations are definitely important to achieve what we wish there. No doubt. Thanks.
We got time for one more question. Anybody? Yes.
Russia has spent a massive amount of its GDP on nuclear weapons, tactical, massive nuclear weapons, yet we hear very little of their relevance in Ukraine. What does the panel think, or maybe what would have Churchill done in that context?
He didn't have nuclear weapons, but I can start out. We were definitely very concerned at the outset of the war, right? Because they started up with all these nuclear threats. We have heard these threats now for almost 2 years. We think it's highly unlikely they will use them. There's strategic nuclear weapons, those, the huge intercontinental missiles are there to prevent any other country from threatening them with nukes. The tactical ones that you could fire into a field in Ukraine or so on are, I'm not going to go into all the scenarios, but the point is that when you start looking at it, it's militarily not very useful. And they would then destroy an area that they actually want to occupy. They will lose all support from China, India, and other countries. So they more or less stopped talking about it. Occasionally, some of the other leaders in Russia, not the president, are mentioning this. I think that's more to get on the news and get the attention from the president and actually sending a real signal.
Thank you very much. Please don't leave, because I know Nina has a surprise, but thank you for coming. Please stay for the mingling. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Emma Soames. Thank you, Delay Piper and International Churchill Society. I'm going to read one last quote. Listen to this. Courage is rightly esteemed the first of human qualities because it is the quality that guarantees all others. Have a nice evening.